Alright class, today we're going to talk about the remainder and factor theorem. So the first thing we're going to talk about is the remainder theorem. So if for some reason you divide your polynomial f of x, so if it's divided by a factor of x minus c, where c is your, I shouldn't say by a factor, by a number c, then whatever value you get when you plug c into your function is the remainder. So if I want to divide the fact by x plus 2, I want to divide by negative 2, I put negative 2 into the equation, and whatever I get out would be the remainder if I divided by that. And then taking that a step further, if when you put the number in you get 0, then we know the x minus c is a factor of f of x. So we can then factor the equation. Alright, so pause the screen if you need to keep writing, otherwise I'm going to keep going. So first example says, is x plus 4 a factor? Well, first thing you have to do is figure out what the c value is here. Since it's x plus 4, we're using x equals negative 4, and we're going to plug that in to our equation. So do f of negative 4, you get 4 times negative 4 to the 6th power, minus 64 times negative 4 to the 4th, plus negative 4 squared, minus 15. So at this point you would use your calculator, because these are big numbers, type it all in, and what you get is that the value is 1. So this means that if you divide by this thing here, you get a remainder of 1, which means it is not a factor, because it's not equal to 0, so not a factor. Negative 4 is not a 0. This is not a factor. What you found out is that if you put negative 4 in, you get a 1 out for the y. In order for it to be a factor, you have to get 0 out. So let's try it with this one. Is f of, this will be x equals 2. So is f of 2 a factor? So we plug 2 in. That should be squared. Okay. So you get 64 minus 60 minus 4, which is 0. So since you get that there's no remainder, you can say that yes, the x minus 2 piece is a factor, because you got a 0. We're going to use this information to factor. So let's see if you guys remember synthetic division. I think we talked about it at the beginning of the year just as a review. Now we're going to do it again. So if this, I'm already telling you it is a factor because we also found that in the last problem, we know we're going to divide by the number 2. Now what you do is you list all the coefficients of descending order. So the x to the 4th term has a 4. Now be careful. There's no x to the 3rd term. We need to put a 0 because x to the 3rd is 0x to the 3rd. There's also 0x, so we have to remember that's there too. We get a negative 15x squared, a 0x, and a negative 4. Now we can do synthetic division. A quick reminder on how to do that for this one. Bring the first number down. Multiply the first number times your thing you're dividing by. So 4 times 2 is 8. You put that here. Then you add down. So now the 8 pops up here. You repeat the process. 8 times 2 is 16. 16 plus a negative 15 is 1. 1 times 2 is 2. You add these down. You get a 2. 2 times 2 is 4. And sure enough, our remainder is 0. And it should have been 0 because we knew that it was a 0. If you know you have a 0 and you do the synthetic division and you don't end up with a 0, that means you did something wrong. So what we just said was that we divided by this factor, so now that factor is factored out, and we're left with these. Now, these numbers are corresponding to the powers that are 1 below where it started. So this is now an x cubed, x squared, x, and a number. So we have 4x cubed plus 8x squared plus 1x plus 2. Now, we don't know if this is completely factored yet because now I have this piece to look at. And I have 4 pieces with a cubic, so sure enough, I'm going to try grouping because that's what I have here. So if I try grouping, I get 4x squared times x plus 2. And then if I pull a 1 out of this one, I get an x plus 2. So sure enough, grouping worked because these match. So my final answer to the whole problem is, I still have the x minus 2 because that's what I divided out. I have a 4x squared plus 1, and I have an x plus 2. Again, the calculator will give you your zeros sometimes. Sometimes I will give you the 0. So let's look at the next page. The next page is where you have to use your calculator. So it says use your graphing calculator to find 1, 0, and then use synthetic division to factor completely. So I'm going to graph this on my calculator. And actually, this is what it looks like. I kind of skipped ahead so I didn't have to, type it in with you guys watching. So type this into your Y1, graph it, and what I do is I kind of just look and see if there are any nice looking zeros where it's hitting. It looks like at 2 we're hitting it. So what I do is I just go to second graph and look when x is 2, sure enough y is 0. So that's one of my nice zeros. So I'm going to use that one. Okay. So I synthetically divide by the 2. I write out all the coefficients that I need to. Notice how they are, it's all descending order, so I don't need to put any zeros in. Then I do 2 times 2 is 4. You add down, you get a negative 1. 2 times negative 1 is negative 2. Add down, you get negative 6. Negative 6 times 2 is negative 12, and we get our 0. So here's what we are ended up with so far. F of x equals, if it's x equals 2, that's the factor x minus 2. Then we have this. Okay, now, if you look back at the graphing calculator to help you out, you should notice that at 2, it bounces. It bounces, which means that there should be another x minus 2. So, I don't know where I am. Hold on. There we go. So if you need to factor this, you should know there's going to be another x minus 2 out of here. And then there has to be a 2x something. Well, what multiplies to negative 6? This is where you guys have to guess and check. Two numbers that multiply to negative 6 are negative 2 and positive 3. So that's just the guess and check method. You knew you needed a 2x and an x in the front because you have a 2x squared. And you just had to figure out where the numbers went. And then notice how we have 2 factors of x minus 2. That's why it bounces. So you could write it like that, or you can write it like, and actually you probably should write it like this. And that makes sense, because it goes through negative 3 halves. This looks like negative 1.5 over here on the left. And then this looks like 2, and it happens twice. And that's what we saw. This will give us a negative 3 halves if we solved it. Alright, I'm going to pause and get the next one up. Hold on. Okay, so now we're on this next one. Oh, it's not moving for me. Hold on. There we go. Use your graphing calculator to find 2 zeros and then synthetic divide to get the rest. So if you graph this function right here, which I now have in my calculator, 3x to the 4th plus 10x cubed minus 19x squared minus 34x plus 40, and you look at your graph, there it hits 4 places. Those are 4 of the zeros. I'm going to start from left to right. It looks like negative 4 and negative 2 are my zeros. To check, I go to my table. When x is negative 2 and when x is negative 4, those are 2 zeros. You could also see that 1 is also a 0. So there's 3 of them you could choose between. It doesn't matter. I'm going to use negative 4 and negative 2. So when you synthetically divide, we have all the numbers here. And then we do the synthetic division, so bring the 3 down, and then you get negative 12. Add together negative 2, positive 8, negative 11, positive 44. That would be a positive 10. That'd be negative 40, which gives us the 0. Now here's what's great. You can just go right on and do the second one with this stuff here. So it's like a double synthetic division. So now we've lost this piece. Now this is 3x cubed. And we do the whole process again. But something's wrong. What is it? This is positive 16. 16 minus 11 is 5. Negative 2 is negative 10, and then we get the 0. Okay. So here we go. So what we're left with is this. F of x is equal to x plus 4 and x plus 2. That we took out already. Since we took 2 of these out, these numbers are x squared, x, and the number. Okay? So we're left with 3x squared minus 8x plus 5. And again, the reason why this is a power of 2, we were at a power of 4. At this stage, we're at a power of 3. And now at this stage, we're at a power of 2, because we took out 2 of the x's. So now we have to factor this if possible. And this again is another guess and check. So we know the two numbers have to be 3x and x. We know the two back numbers have to be a 5 and a 1, and they both have to be negative. So we can get this negative 8. So now you just have to figure out where the 5 and the 1 go. If I put the 5 here, I get a negative 15. That's not going to help. I need to put the 5 here. And I need to put the 1 here. Which makes sense because we actually knew on the graphing calculator, we saw that 1 was one of the zeros. So this should have been a factor. And then this is the remaining 0, which is at 5/3. So that is the function completely factored using synthetic division to get it down to a quadratic and then going from there. All right, that is it for today.